Black twins threatened by police officers in a bar, unaware that one is a captain and the other is a SEAL commander. Hey, you two. I think you better get out of here before things get complicated for you. Officer Brett Coleman's voice cut through the country music playing in the bar as he and his two colleagues formed a semicircle around the twins' table. It was Friday night at Danny's Tavern, a bar known for being off-duty police territory. The dim lights barely disguised the tension that was beginning to build in the air. Daniel and David Thompson, 34-year-old twins, had barely touched their beers when the three officers approached. "Is there a problem, officer?" Daniel asked calmly, without looking up from his bottle. His posture was too relaxed for someone being intimidated, something Brett didn't notice, but his partner, Officer Rick Torres, did, with a slight frown. "The problem," Brett continued, resting his hands on the table and leaning forward, "is that this isn't exactly the kind of place for people like you, you know? We don't want any trouble." David, sitting next to his brother, finally looked up. His eyes met Brett's with a disturbing serenity. There was no fear there, just the weary patience of someone who had seen this movie before. "Trouble? We're just having a quiet beer." The third officer, Jake Morrison, the youngest and visibly most intoxicated, gave a harsh laugh. "Don't you get it? This bar is ours. Our turf. And we don't like suspicious characters around here." Some customers discreetly turned their heads, but most continued to pretend not to see anything. It was the kind of situation that sensible people preferred to ignore. Three off-duty police officers against two black men who had apparently committed the crime of being in the wrong place. Daniel exchanged a brief glance with David. It was no more than half a second, but in that instant, an entire conversation passed between them. Years of shared experiences, of similar situations faced since adolescence, of learning together when to fight and when to strategically retreat. What Brett Coleman didn't know, and couldn't imagine, was that this moment of silence was not submission. It was assessment. Daniel was mentally cataloging every detail. The way Brett left his right side unprotected, how Rick kept his hand very close to his gun even though he was off duty, how Jake staggered slightly, clearly beyond the alcohol limit allowed for someone armed. David, meanwhile, had already identified the establishment's 3 security cameras, calculated the distance to the emergency exit, and noticed that the bar owner, Luis, was watching the scene with growing discomfort from behind the counter. "Look, we don't want any trouble," Daniel finally said, his voice maintaining that irritatingly calm tone that made Brett clench his fists. "Let's finish our drinks and leave, no fuss." "No." Brett slammed his palm on the table, making the bottles shake. "You're leaving now. And you're going to thank me for being in a good mood today." There was an instant flashback in Daniel's mind. He was 15, he and David were coming home from school when police officers stopped them for no reason. "Did you steal these backpacks?" one of them had asked. As if 2 black boys with school backpacks were automatically suspicious. That day, they had lowered their heads and cooperated, feeling the humiliation burn inside. But they weren't 15-year-old boys anymore. "You know," David said softly, taking his wallet out of his pocket in a deliberately slow motion, "it would be interesting to see your IDs. Just to make sure you're really police officers, right?" Brett's face flushed red. "Are you challenging me?" Rick Torres put his hand on Brett's shoulder. "Man, let it go. They're leaving." There was something about the way the twins behaved that activated his survival instincts, a calmness that didn't come from fear, but from confidence. Jake, however, was too far into his alcohol to recognize signs of danger. "You know what your problem is." He pointed a trembling finger at David. "You think you can come here, on our turf, and act all cute? We run this town, you understand." "This town," Daniel repeated, and for the first time there was something sharp in his voice. "Interesting that you should say that." Brett pushed Daniel's shoulder. "Get up. Now." The entire bar was silent now. Even the music seemed to have quieted down. Luis dropped the glass he was drying and discreetly picked up his cell phone. Daniel and David stood up simultaneously, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed almost choreographed. They were exactly the same height, the same athletic build that their casual shirts couldn't completely hide. "We're leaving," Daniel said. "But you're going to regret how you handled this situation." Brett laughed loudly. "Oh yeah? We'll see who regrets it when I decide to search you guys outside. I'm sure I'll find something questionable." "You have no idea who you're talking to, do you?" David asked, but it wasn't a threat, it was almost pity. I don't care if you're kings of Africa, Jake spat out the words. Here you're nothing. The twins walked toward the door, Brett and his colleagues following close behind. Rick Torres felt a chill down his spine, but he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the two brothers moved, not hurriedly, not fearfully, but with the precision of people who are completely in control of the situation. When they reached the door, Daniel stopped and turned. One last chance for you to back down and apologize for what you did in here. Brett pushed his chest out. Or what? Daniel smiled. It wasn't a smile of anger or defiance, but something much more dangerous: patience. The patience of someone who has already won before the fight has begun. Or nothing, he said calmly. Just thought it was fair to warn you. And at that moment, as the door opened and they stepped out into the dimly lit parking lot, no one in the bar, especially not Brett Coleman, could have imagined that the next 15 minutes would completely redefine their lives. If you're enjoying this story and want to find out what happens when arrogance meets real consequences, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what's about to happen in that parking lot will prove that not all people who seem vulnerable really are, and some secrets, when revealed, destroy entire careers in a matter of minutes. The parking lot at Danny's Tavern was almost empty, with only a few spots occupied under the dim, flickering streetlights. Brett Coleman pushed Daniel against the hood of a parked car, the cold metal pressing against his back. You know what the problem is with people like you? Brett spat out the words, his breath still heavy with whiskey. You think you can walk in anywhere, like you're our equals. Jake Morrison circled David, stumbling slightly. I bet you have drugs. You always do. He laughed, a sharp, ugly laugh. We're going to search you thoroughly. Rick Torres watched nervously, his hand still close to his gun even though he wasn't in uniform. Something about those two men continued to bother his instincts, but the alcohol and pressure from his colleagues were stronger than his caution. Daniel remained motionless against the hood, but his eyes moved constantly, calculating distances, angles, vulnerable points. It was a habit he had developed elsewhere, in a completely different context. A place where miscalculating meant not coming home. Fallujah, 2011. Captain Daniel Thompson crouched behind debris, 3 armed insurgents ahead. His battalion awaited his orders. He had 3 seconds to decide. 3 seconds where a mistake meant death. Hey! Brett slapped Daniel on the side of the head. I'm talking to you, you. Careful what you say, David interrupted softly, still not moving. His voice had that same dangerous calm as before. Some words can't be taken back. Jake stepped forward, pushing David hard. Or what? Are you going to sue me? Call the police. He spread his arms, laughing. We are the police, you idiot. Brett began patting Daniel's pockets, his hands deliberately aggressive. Let's see what we have here. Wallet, cell phone. He threw the items on the ground. That's an expensive phone for someone who probably stole it, huh? Give that back, Daniel said, but it wasn't a request. It was an order spoken in a casual tone, the kind of command he was used to giving and being obeyed instantly. Brett picked up on the tone and became even more irritated. Or what exactly are you going to do? Norfolk Naval Base, 2018. Commander David Thompson inspected his SEAL platoon. 20 of the most lethal men on the planet under his command. Discipline isn't about brute force, he told the rookies. It's about knowing when to use the power you have, and when to save it for the right moment. Jake tried to do the same with David, but his alcohol-shaking hands could barely reach his pockets. Freeze there, he ordered, but there was uncertainty in his voice. David was at least 4 inches taller than him, and even relaxed, his physical presence was intimidating in a way Jake couldn't quite define. Do you guys have any idea how many laws you've broken in the last 10 minutes? David asked calmly. Harassment, assault, illegal search without a warrant or probable cause. Look at that. Brett laughed. The street lawyer giving us a law lesson. Rick finally spoke, his voice tense. Brett, man, I think that's enough. They're leaving, let it go. Let it go. Brett turned to him, furious. Since when did you get soft, Torres? These guys need to learn some respect. Across the parking lot, Luis watched from the bar window, his cell phone recording everything. He had seen this scene play out dozens of times before, Brett and his gang picking on victims they thought were defenseless. But this time, Something was different. The two brothers didn't seem scared. They seemed patient. You know what I think? Jake was getting bolder, encouraged by the twins' apparent passivity. I think you guys came here looking for trouble. I think you wanted attention. He poked David's chest with his finger. People like you always want attention. Daniel and David exchanged that look again, half a second of silent communication. Anyone with military training would have recognized it. It was combat coordination, tactical synchronization developed through years of joint operations. Brett pulled handcuffs from his belt. You know what? I think we're going to take you to the station after all. Suspicious behavior, resisting authority. Resisting. Daniel finally turned completely, facing Brett. We haven't offered any resistance. Yet. The word yet hung in the air like a promise. Kandahar, 2015. The Thompson brothers were working together for the first time in hostile territory. The secret, Daniel had told his younger brother, is never to be afraid. It's to control your fear, use it to your advantage. Let them think they've won. Then you strike when they relax. Jake stumbled again, his coordination deteriorating. You don't understand how things work here, do you? He gestured broadly. This is our city. Our territory. And you're just visitors. David suggested, his voice dangerously soft. Outsiders? Or were you going to use another word? Jake's face flushed red. I was going to say you're a problem that needs to be dealt with. Brett clicked the handcuffs open. Hands behind your back. Now. No, Daniel said simply. The parking lot fell completely silent for 3 whole seconds. Brett blinked, as if unsure he'd heard correctly. What did you say? I said no. Daniel crossed his arms. We haven't committed any crime. We're not going to be handcuffed. And if you try to touch me again, you'll find out it was the worst decision you ever made. The audacity of the words momentarily paralyzed Brett. People didn't talk to him like that. Especially not people he considered inferior. Are you threatening me? His voice rose an octave. Did you just threaten a police officer? No, David interjected. He's warning you. Big difference. Rick took a step back, his instincts finally winning out. Guys, seriously, something's wrong here. Let's go. But Brett was red with rage now, his authority publicly challenged. No. These two are going to learn today. He grabbed his radio. I'm calling for backup. We're going to do this the right way. Right. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in that sound. You have no idea what's right. Jake tried to grab David's arm, but the commander simply twisted his body, causing Jake's movement to meet only air. It was so smooth, so efficient, that it seemed accidental. But Rick saw it. And he recognized combat training when he saw it. Brett, Rick said urgently. Stop this. Now. Shut up, Torres. The bar lights went out. Luis was closing up. In a few minutes, that parking lot would witness something that would completely change the lives of everyone present. Daniel glanced at his watch, a Luminox Navy SEAL, discreet but unmistakable to those who knew. You have exactly 1 minute to apologize and leave. Brett laughed in his face. Or what? Or you'll find out, David replied, that there are very specific consequences for corrupt police officers who harass high-ranking military personnel. The phrase hung in the air like a grenade about to explode. Brett frowned, processing the words. Military personnel? High-ranking? But before he could ask, Jake, at the height of his drunkenness and arrogance, made the worst possible choice. He pulled out his baton. Enough talk, he growled, advancing. And that's when everything changed. What those 3 arrogant police officers couldn't have known was that the next 30 seconds would be filmed, go viral, and destroy not only their careers, but the entire network of corruption they represented. Because Daniel and David Thompson weren't just twins who knew how to defend themselves. They were human weapons trained with military precision, waiting patiently for the exact moment when self-defense would become not only justified, but devastatingly documented. Jake's baton sliced through the air, but never reached its target. David simply moved his head 2 centimeters to the left, the bare minimum necessary. The movement was so economical, so precisely calculated, that it seemed almost casual. Jake stumbled on his own momentum, staggering forward. Before Brett or Rick could process what had happened, Daniel had his phone in his hand, filming. Unprovoked assault by armed police officer, he narrated calmly to the camera. Attempted assault with a blunt weapon against an unarmed civilian. Turn that damn thing off. Brett lunged for the phone, but Daniel had already taken 2 steps back, keeping perfect distance. Interesting, David commented, pulling out his own cell phone. Now it's 2 officers attempting to illegally confiscate private property while committing assault. Rick Torres finally understood. His survival instinct screamed, these men were no ordinary victims. The way they moved, how they coordinated actions without speaking, how they maintained perfect situational awareness. They were military. Probably not just military, but special operations. Brett, Rick said urgently, pulling his colleague's arm. Stop. Now. Why? Brett shook off his touch. Are they recording? Great. I'll show the whole world how we deal with criminals resisting arrest. That's when things really started to change. Luis walked out the back door of the bar, his phone also recording. I've already called the county sheriff, he announced loud and clear. And I've sent the videos to 3 local newspapers. You're fired, Luis, Brett growled. And your bar is getting a health inspection tomorrow. It won't, a female voice cut through the night. A black woman in a suit emerged from a car parked in the shadows, her posture exuding authority. Because I am Assistant District Attorney Lisa Monroe, and I just witnessed 3 police officers commit at least 7 documented crimes. Brett's face drained of color. Lisa approached calmly, her badge open in her hand. Harassment, intimidation, attempted assault, abuse of authority, misconduct. She counted them off on her fingers. Shall I go on? They started it. Jake stammered, pointing at the twins. They provoked us at the bar. Really? Lisa raised an eyebrow. Because the videos I've received show the 3 of you starting the confrontation. And continuing even after being warned multiple times. David put away his cell phone and crossed his arms. A discreet smile played on his lips. Prosecutor Monroe. Long time no see. Commander Thompson, she nodded, recognition in her eyes. Then she looked at Daniel. Captain Thompson. The silence that fell over the parking lot was absolute. Rick closed his eyes, realizing the magnitude of the mistake. Brett blinked several times, his drunken brain struggling to process. Jake simply froze. Wait, what? Brett finally managed to articulate. Daniel stepped forward, his posture subtly changing. No longer the calm of one who avoids confrontation, but the authority of one who commands men in combat. Captain Daniel Thompson, United States Army. Ranger Battalion, currently an instructor at West Point. David followed suit. Commander David Thompson, Navy SEALs, Team 6. Currently on leave after 3 tours in the Middle East. Reality crashed down on Brett like an avalanche. He had harassed, intimidated, and attempted to arrest 2 of the most highly trained military officers in the country. On camera. With witnesses. That doesn't change anything, Brett tried to regain some authority, but his voice trembled. You still haven't identified yourselves as. We're not required to identify ourselves to civilians, Daniel cut in, his voice now carrying the weight of command. And definitely not when we're being illegally harassed by off-duty drunk police officers. Rick took a step back, raising his hands. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. We can all just forget about this and. Forget. Lisa's voice was sharp as glass. 3 armed drunk police officers harassed 2 decorated military officers, attempted to illegally arrest them, and committed assault. You think that just goes away? Jake began to sweat visibly. We didn't know. If we had known they were military. So it would have been acceptable to do this to ordinary civilians? David tilted his head. Is that what you're saying? That harassing people is okay as long as they're not military? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Brett tried one last card. You have no proof of anything. It's your word against ours, and there are 3 of us officers. Daniel smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Prosecutor, how many videos do you have so far? 4 different angles, Lisa replied, consulting her tablet. Louise started recording while you were still inside the bar. The Thompson brothers have footage from the parking lot. And I have the last 8 minutes. Oh, David added casually, and our watches record too. He raised his wrist, showing off the military-grade device. Audio and video. Standard security protocol when we're in civilian territory. Brett staggered as if he'd been punched. In addition, Lisa continued, swiping through her tablet, I already have 3 witnesses from the bar willing to testify. And it appears that Danny's Tavern has security cameras that, surprise, still work. Rick sat down on the curb, his head in his hands. He knew it was over. Not just for that night, but their careers, their reputations, their lives as they knew them. What do you want? Brett asked, his tone shifting from aggressive to desperate. Money? We can pay. Apologies? I'll apologize right now. What we want, Daniel said slowly, is justice. Not just for us, but for all the other people you've done this to over the years. Lisa nodded. Because I'd bet my career that you 3 have a history. How many other people have you harassed, Brett? How many illegal arrests? How many lives ruined because you thought you were above the law? Jake was crying now, tears streaming down his red face. My career, my family will kill me. You should have thought about that before, David replied without a shred of sympathy. Before you decided you had the right to intimidate people just because they didn't look like you. A sheriff's patrol car pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. 2 officers got out, and Rick recognized one of them, a veteran officer who had never liked Brett's crowd. Prosecutor Monroe, the deputy sheriff, greeted her. We got your call. Are these the guys? They are, Lisa confirmed. 3 counts of harassment, attempted aggravated assault, abuse of authority, conduct unbecoming a public official. And that's just the beginning. As Rick, Brett, and Jake were handcuffed, the irony not lost on anyone, Brett looked at the twins one last time. How? He asked, genuinely confused. How did you set this up? Daniel exchanged a glance with David, a silent communication passing between them. Then he looked back at Brett. We didn't set anything up, he said calmly. You did it all yourselves. We just made sure it was documented. As the 3 officers were being put into the police cars, Luis approached the brothers. Thank you, he said simply. These guys have been doing this for years. No one ever had the courage to stand up to them. How many? David asked. How many other people? Luis thought for a moment. Dozens. Maybe hundreds over the years. Always the same targets, anyone they considered different. Daniel nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. What had started as self-defense was quickly turning into something bigger. Lisa put away her tablet. You 2 are free to go. I'll need formal statements tomorrow, but for today, she paused. Is there anything else you want to tell me about these 3? The brothers looked at each other again. That silent communication that only twins who had been through war zones together could have. Maybe, Daniel said finally. But first, we need to make some calls. Brett's phone vibrated. Then Rick's. Then Jake's. Notifications exploding simultaneously. What? Brett unlocked the screen, and his face drained of color. The video had gone viral. #CorruptCopsExposed had 2.3 million views in 3 hours. Every angle, the harassment at the bar, the threats in the parking lot, the attempted assault. And worst of all, their faces, full names, and badge numbers stamped on every frame. Oh my God, Jake whispered from the patrol car, watching his career crumble in real time. The comments were relentless. People identifying other cases, other victims. The police department being bombarded with calls. Daniel watched everything on Lisa's tablet, his expression neutral. 17 victims have already come forward, she reported. All with similar stories. Some with evidence. Brett tried to speak from the patrol car. We can fix this. Shut up, the deputy sheriff ordered. You 3 are suspended without pay while a federal investigation is opened. And Brett? Your record is being reviewed. Every arrest, every report from the last 8 years. Rick was crying silently. His wife had already called, she saw the video, she filed for divorce. The mortgage on the house, his son's college tuition, everything depended on the salary he had just lost. David crossed his arms. You had multiple chances to stop. Every warning ignored, every opportunity wasted. Captain Thompson, the deputy sheriff approached, the Pentagon called. They want your reports for possible additional military prosecution against any officer who has interacted with active military personnel. Brett vomited inside the patrol car. By morning, 7 national news outlets had covered the story. By afternoon, the mayor had announced a complete overhaul of the department. By evening, the 3 former police officers were facing a combined 23 criminal charges. Luis had reopened the bar. Now there was a line at the door. Everyone wanted to drink at the place where corrupt officers had finally met their justice. Daniel and David watched the news at the hotel. 18 calls from the Pentagon, Daniel commented. They want us to testify about procedures. And 3 invitations to speak about combating police abuse, David added. In online comments, previous victims shared their relief. Justice was late, but finally real. At the back of the police station, Brett stared at the cell wall. Everything lost: career, respect, future. Why? Because he had underestimated 2 men based solely on the color of their skin. The irony was cruel. The system he had manipulated for years now crushed him with relentless precision. And as millions watched his downfall, a single truth echoed: arrogance always takes its toll. Always. 6 months later, Brett Coleman was serving coffee at a roadside diner. Sentenced to 3 years of probation, he had lost everything: his badge, his pension, his home, his family. Jake sold insurance over the phone, his voice trembling every time he had to identify himself. Rick worked as a night security guard at a supermarket, avoiding mirrors. The police department had been completely overhauled. 17 officers were dismissed. 43 cases were reviewed. 8 victims were exonerated and financially compensated. Daniel Thompson was promoted to major, now directing ethics training programs for police forces in 6 states. Respect is not demanded, he explained in crowded lectures. It is earned. David accepted a position at the Pentagon, consulting on military-civilian relations. His photo was on the cover of Time magazine, the commander who changed the debate on police abuse. Luis expanded his bar to 3 locations. He now trained bartenders on how to document and report abuses of authority. Silent witnesses are accomplices became a national slogan. Lisa Monroe was elected chief district attorney with 73% of the vote. She was the first black woman to hold the position. On his last day of probation, Brett saw Daniel being interviewed on TV. Hate doesn't define who we are, the major said. It defines who we choose not to be. Brett turned off the TV, the weight of irony crushing him. He had had all the privileges: badge, gun, system. The Thompson brothers had only their dignity. And yet they won. Because in the end, arrogance always loses to competence. Prejudice always falls before character. And those who underestimate others based on appearances always discover, too late, that they misjudged the right people. The best revenge was never to destroy enemies. It was to build something so big that they were too small to reach it. Daniel and David proved it. Brett learned it too late. Justice has no color. It has consequences. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel. Because when dignity meets opportunity, even the powerful learn humility, the hard way.